Good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to the Frank Batten School, the Great Hall. Dean Solomon, we're always excited to have distinguished events like this under your patronage. Thank you very much for joining us today. And a warm welcome to all of you to the latest episode in the Center for Politics Acclaimed Ambassador Series, starring today His Excellency, Ambassador Martin Weiss from the Republic of Austria. My name is Stephen Mull, and I serve as the university's Vice Provost for Global Affairs here at UVA. I want to thank all of the sponsors for today's event, and there's a lot of them, beginning, of course, with the Center for Politics, the Center for German Studies, the European Studies Program, the Jewish Studies Program, the Virginia Center for the Study of Religion, the Department of Germanic Languages and Literature, and of course our host, the Frank Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy. Ambassador Weiss's visit to the university today is in conjunction with our symposium dedicated to the memory of inventor and social philosopher Joseph Papal on the state as experiment. The effect of Papal-Linnaeus's thinking has had on social policy in the United States and elsewhere since his death almost exactly a century ago in Vienna has been extraordinary. His assertion of the intrinsic worth of every human individual and his call on states to ensure systems that are in place to meet primary human needs, such as clothing, food, shelter, healthcare, and education, has had a dramatic impact on every sweeping social movement in the United States in the 20th century, from the progressive movement through the New Deal, the Civil Rights Movement, and the Great Society. And it's increasingly important in framing the world's approach to humanitarian crises around the world in providing help to victims of conflict and natural disasters, including what we're seeing today in the response to the invasion of Ukraine. He elevated an often acrimonious and polarized debate on the various merits and flaws between capitalism and Marxism to focus attention beyond politics on how to meet basic human needs and to establish that as the most important responsibility of any government, regardless of their ideological stripe. Mr. Ambassador, I think you have the distinction of starring in the most widely sponsored event at the University of Virginia this year, if not ever. Everyone wants to associate with Austria, as you can see with our rich turnout today. And as a recovering US diplomat myself, it's a sentiment I fully share. During my time in the Obama administration as chief implementer of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the Iran nuclear deal, I had the privilege of visiting Vienna at least once every 3 months to meet with our partners in the deal. And I fell in love with your beautiful capital city in the heart of Europe, with its legendary hospitality, its fantastic food, beer, and wine, its gemütlich cafes, its skillful diplomats, of course, and a gracious gentility unmatched in any other capital around the world. Certainly unmatched these days in Washington, as I'm sure you're finding. Austria today continues to play a central role as one of the world's leading diplomatic capitals, but it is a lot more than that. With its strong commitment to Western liberal democratic values while maintaining a principled neutrality, Austria stands as a shining example of the simple truth that liberal democracy threatens no one, regardless of what Mr. Putin and others may say about it. In the wake of Russia's brutal, unprovoked invasion on its Ukrainian neighbor, we welcome and admire Austria's strong stance in defense of the inviolability of borders, its rapid humanitarian and military assistance to Ukraine, now totaling about $20 million, its hosting of up to 300,000 Ukrainian refugees, and its strong solidarity with the rest of the European Union in imposing costs on Russia for its aggression at no small cost or risk to Austria itself. I can think of no more distinguished representative for this very special country than our guest today. His Excellency, Ambassador Martin Weiss, has been serving in Washington as ambassador since 2019, the latest assignment in a glittering diplomatic career that has featured his appointment as Austria's ambassador to Israel from 2015 to 2019, and from ambassador to Cyprus from 2009 to 2012. He brings extraordinary knowledge of the United States to his duties, having spent about 1/3 of his more than 30-year diplomatic career living in the United States as a member of the Austrian mission to the United Nations in New York, Austria's Consul General in Los Angeles for 5 years from 2004 to 2009, and various positions in Austria's embassy in Washington, including as political counselor, director of the Austrian Press and Information Service, and counselor for congressional affairs and public diplomacy, which I can only imagine is one of the hardest jobs for any diplomat in Washington to have. If you have any secrets about how to manage the US Congress, we'd love to hear them today. And I've saved the most important part about Ambassador Weiss's CV for last. He is actually a Wahoo. That's right. Ambassador Weiss earned a Master's of Law degree from the University of Virginia Law School in 1989, just prior to joining Austria's diplomatic corps. Moderating our program today will be my colleague, Damon Irby, the Director of Global Initiatives at UVA's Center for Politics. Damon has been in that role since 2009 and has been a prominent figure in UVA's global engagement ever since. He launched the center's prestigious Ambassador Series in 2014, and since then, he's brought more than 24 ambassadors from various countries around the world here to grounds and virtually during the pandemic, including Ambassador Weiss here today. Damon has also led civic leadership seminars for the U.S. Department of State and USAID for now more than 1,500 participants from 46 countries over the years. And of special interest today, Damon actually spent 2 years of his youth living in Austria, perfecting his Austrian German speaking language skills. But today will be in English, Damon and Ambassador Weiss assures me. So now please join me in giving a warm welcome home to our proudest Wahoo in Washington Diplomatic Corps, Ambassador Weiss and Damon Irby.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to open up. First of all, thank you all for being with us today. We're going to have a dialogue between the two of us, and then I promise, we will set aside at least 20 minutes for Q&A from the audience. And I have to mention this now up front before I forget. Do not leave without getting food. We have food back there, and I know the staff of the Batten School does not want to eat all the sandwiches. So please, by all means, don't depart without lunch. So if it's okay, we'll go ahead. Well, would you like to make an opening comment, Mr. Ambassador?
And I'll use a quote of Lenin. I'm not a great Lenin scholar, I have to say, but the quote is quite fitting when he said that there are decades where nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen. Of course, there was a certain split in the European Union. You had our Polish friends who had memories of Russia. We had our Baltic friends who took a very tough line. And then there were countries like Germany, also Austria, and some others who said when they were starting their rant about Russia, we were like, guys, can you please get the chip off your shoulder for once? I mean, come on. There are things that we can do together that will work. And you know, the German experience, of course, was the experience of an Ostpolitik that at the end of the day, in 1989, led to the fall of the wall, at the end of the Iron Curtain, reunification of Germany. So there was an example of how an engagement with someone who is ideologically not exactly where you are, but it can work over time. And we took somewhat of a similar approach with Russia. If you remember this Nord Stream 2 debate, which was a tough debate that we led over the years, and there were countries like actually France, Italy, Germany, Austria that were financing a pipeline that led from Russia underneath the Baltic Sea into Germany, very nicely circumventing Ukraine. But what the argument was, well, listen, even in the darkest day of the Cold War, Russian gas was always flowing to Europe. So this was a source of income for Russia. It was a source of stability. It helped the competitiveness of our industry. So this was a model that made kind of sense. Well, all of this makes sense until February 24. Because when at the other end of the pipeline is not someone that you can work with or a possible partner, but if at the other end of that pipeline there is an enemy, actually a mortal enemy of yours, then the whole calculation changes. And that's exactly what we're seeing. It's not so easy to come to grips with that, not easy for Austria. We, after all, within the Austrian energy mix, 20% are natural gas, and out of those 20%, 80% come from Russia. So if Vladimir Putin decides tomorrow to turn off the gas spigot, we are missing 16% of our energy. And parts of the industry depend on gas as their energy resource. So this is a big change. But I think we are all taking a very hard look. So I think this would be my opening statement. I think we have to take a very hard look at what we thought was possible, at what we thought we could do and achieve together in Europe, and how the world looks right now, and it's not exactly a rosy picture.
Absolutely. Well, speaking on together, most recently, the United States and Austria held high-level talks in Vienna. And I would love your 101 assessment on the current relationship between Austria and the United States. We're strategic partners. I know the focus of that meeting was mostly Ukraine, I'm sure, but could you give us a 101 bird's eye view of the relationship between our countries?
Yeah, it's a strong relationship, but we do these strategic talks particularly in order to be in this constant kind of dialogue, because, you know, it's for the United States, it's just too easy to overlook that, you know, well, they're the Austrians too, well, okay. So you have to be engaged. And Washington these days, you know, it's like ancient Rome. Everybody has to come to Rome and to understand what's going on in this country, because it is of such relevance to all of us. And this strategic dialogue gives us this opportunity to really compare notes and be as close as possible, and I think that's extremely helpful. We have a very strong economic relationship. The United States are our number 2 partner, only to be beaten by Germany, and we have a common border, but the United States is a very important partner. We have huge investments from Austria coming into the United States. We built a big steel plant in the south of in Texas, have other billion-dollar investments in the US, and it goes both ways. United States companies employ 50,000 employees in Austria. We do the same in the United States. So a lot happens on the economic level, but we talk about the cultural level, the political level. I think, as Egon Bahr said, the United States are indispensable. And for us, this is a very important exchange. Like you said, the last time around, we talked a lot about Ukraine. And I think that was what we should do. But we enjoy the partnership, but we are also aware that we are, by many dimensions, the junior in that partnership. But it's an important dialogue to keep. And also sometimes, you know, you have to also remind the United States and say, listen, guys, you also have to tell your story abroad. You know, it's not enough to tell your story here. You also have to go the extra mile. And I think that's sometimes a reminder that is kind of helpful.
Absolutely. You know, when we first communicated with each other, my office with yours, about holding this event, we never dreamed we would be in the position that we're in now. I mean, we've been working on this for some time. And of course, now we're seeing the tragedy unfold that is really beyond words and description. And one of the key elements of that tragedy is, of course, the expansion of refugees throughout Europe. It's now over 4 million who have gone beyond throughout Europe and, of course, beyond. And naturally, Austria is a destination for many of these refugees, either passing through or remaining. And Austria has a long tradition of hosting refugees. Steve mentioned I was an exchange student there back in 1991-92. There are many from the Balkans who were there. Of course, more recently, refugees from Syria, and now Ukraine, of course. And I'm curious, has Austria's experience in hosting and managing refugees from those previous times provided some sort of blueprint for the Ukrainians who have come, or is it a completely different scenario? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's partially it's different, and it partially lessons learned apply. In the Syrian crisis, we had over a time span of 7 years some 80,000 refugees from Syria that came to Austria. Ukraine, we saw within a month and a half, 250,000 Ukrainians come to Austria, out of which approximately 50,000 we think now will stay in Austria. So there's a huge influx in a short span of time. But it's still different on some levels. The European Union has decided that Ukrainian refugees from day one get a work permit, get full access to the labor market, which is not what you typically do in refugee situations, because if you apply as a refugee from Syria, you can apply for asylum. There will be a procedure. This can easily take a year or two, and until the day that you get the full status, you cannot work in Austria. You will get some money, you will not be sitting on the street, but you cannot work. Ukrainians can work from day one. Now, there is a huge difference. What we have learned, of course, in the Syrian crisis and in others, that refugees and asylum questions are always it's always a question of numbers, because at the end of the day, what has to be the goal of your country is you have to integrate these people. If you don't, you have an endless problem. It'll go down generations and it will haunt you. So you have to do everything you can to integrate, but integration takes a lot of time and money. Because how do you teach in a class where you have a lot of children who don't speak a single word of Austrian, German, right? So you have to invest in teachers. Like in the Ukraine now, we are bringing a second teacher into the school classes, a teacher who speaks Russian, Ukrainian, to make sure that those kids really get a start. And I think this is the one lesson that we have really learned. If you don't invest in integration, then you end up with the French banlieue, where the French police doesn't even dare to go. Mm-hmm. And you have basically given up on your own country. You can't do that, we won't do that. But it means money. And in the Austrian situation, refugees coming to Austria means basically refugees coming to Vienna. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because a refugee from Ukraine doesn't go to a little village in the Austrian Alps, as scenic as it might be, but you want to go somewhere where you have a job, where you potentially have Ukrainian friends or other contacts. So this all concentrates on Vienna. And Vienna is a city of 2 million. So bring in 50,000, you will feel that in that city. So this is something that we are still grappling with, and I think we have done the right thing over the years, that we really took a lot of money in order to put it into that. But there's a point where you will get resistance, where the population will say, listen, but it's money extremely well spent, and we have spent it then, and we will spend it now, because if you overlook it, then it will be an endless problem. And Ukrainians, I think, of course, the advantage now, the situation we have, it's who is coming now. It's mostly women with children, because if you're a Ukrainian man between 18 and 60, you cannot leave the country. You're supposed to fight or help the country in one other way. So basically, it's women and children. Makes it a little easier also on the labor market. And of course, what also happened, as unfair as it is, but a war in Syria feels like a war that's far, far away. Ukraine from Austria is a distance of Washington, D.C. to West Virginia. Mm-hmm. That's how close this is to Austria. And the pictures that we are seeing, tanks rolling into a European city that very much looks like Graz or Vienna. That just triggers a collective memory, even if I don't have it personally, but this is still World War II memory. And that triggers a collective response where people will say, well, listen, we just cannot let this stand possibly. So I think that, at least for the time being, there might be a day where things change, but for now, I think there is an outpouring of help on all kinds of levels. And I think that's helpful to the Ukrainians that are coming. And, it's something when you see some Ukrainian kids that for the first time again, they have a smile, they can go to a school. And so it's like, yeah, it's the right thing to do. And I hope we will be able to do that for as long as it takes.
Absolutely. On the topic of World War II, one unique characteristic of Austria is the fact that it is the only country that the Soviet Union voluntarily left during the Cold War. Austria was partitioned, much like Germany was. And in 1955, following the signing of the Austrian state agreement, the Soviets actually left. Of course, they left a grandiose monument for their generosity of leaving, but they did in fact leave. And a lot of recently Austria and the Austrian state agreement has been brought up as a potential similar remedy for a negotiated peace between Ukraine and Russia. And I'm curious, has Austria been approached by anyone to help be a part of that hopeful one day agreement? Or has Austria looked into the possibility or offered its assistance?
Yeah, well, as to the Soviet Union, you're perfectly right. All these photos of the 4 men in a Jeep, many of them were taken in Vienna because we had exactly that experience. And out of the 4 men, we were pretty sure that 3 men would leave Austria when the time came. About the 4th one, we were not so sure because the Soviet Union occupied the easternmost part of Austria, and Vienna was a divided city. So for many years, it was by no means clear that Austria would really regain its territorial integrity. And it was only in 1953 when Stalin died and Khrushchev came to power that there was this thawing in the relations between in the Cold War. And there was this really, sometimes there's a moment in history where you really can change something. And this was the moment where we could strike the deal that we said, you know what, guys, you leave, you get your monument, and we will promise that we will never join NATO or any other military alliance. We will be neutral, as the Swiss are in the Swiss model, and off you go. And for the Soviet Union, that was a deal that was, in this point in time, definitely not 5 years before, but probably not even 2-3 years later. But just at that moment in time, it was possible to get this deal. So we became neutral out of our own free will. That's how it's written in the Austrian constitution. There was a political bargain struck, but at the end of the day, we decided on our own. At the time, I think many Austrians didn't even know what neutrality meant. It was just a way to get your country back. And so whatever it took, where can I sign? Sure, whatever. But it was an armed neutrality. The Swiss model is an armed neutrality. So Austria was supposed, because if you don't join an alliance, if nobody helps you when you get attacked, well, then you have to be able to defend yourself. That was the Austrian model. We didn't really live up to that model. Our defense spending is extremely slim. And we were lucky enough that we are surrounded by NATO countries, so the risk of being invaded by Liechtenstein and Switzerland is kind of not that huge. But it was a neutrality that is supposed to be able to defend itself. And yes, there were discussions with Ukraine already years back about this model, because we heard this discussion. You wonder, of course, when you see what's happening now, how honest were the Russian demands. But yes, maybe there is this idea that neutrality could be something that could solve the issue. But it's a little funny when the Russians say, well, neutrality, but of course you completely have to disarm. That is exactly not the model of neutrality that we are having in Austria or that the Swiss have. If Ukraine would ever opt for that model, they would have to turn into a porcupine. Mm-hmm. Well, then you can talk about neutrality, and I think it might actually be something, because when we hear now discussions that the Ukrainians say, well, we need guarantees. Well, paper is patient. I can give you a guarantee right here. And good luck on calling me on the day when I really need your help. So, and of course, the guarantees are problematic because if one NATO country would give you guarantee, basically you draw all of NATO into this guarantee, so you can't get this guarantee. But if, as a Ukrainian, I would get the guarantee that I get your Patriot missiles, I get your tanks, I get your airplanes, you turn me into a porcupine, then I might be able to talk about neutrality. I don't think that's on the mind of Vladimir Putin, though.
I doubt it, unfortunately. So I'm thinking now about, of course, the horrible situation in Ukraine, and Vladimir Putin has basically leaned on his possession of nuclear weapons, his threat of using nuclear weapons both within Ukraine and beyond. And as you just pointed out, the proximity of Austria to Ukraine is very near. And I'm curious, has Austria taken any special precautions as it relates to the nuclear threat, this particular nuclear threat? Or has Austria started to make any changes to their security situation in general?
Precautions as in handing out iodine tablets to the Austrian population? Well, no, actually, I think what the West has done in a response to the Russians rattling their nuclear saber is that we have played it very cool. Because, what does it mean, really? I mean, this is kind of, so we cannot send any weapons to Ukraine because you are threatening us with nuclear war. Nobody has taken that threat for serious, although it is a serious threat. But I think we've played it extremely cool. And, the Russians are accepting it, have to accept that we will arm Ukraine, and there's nothing you can do about that. And this is how this is going to be played. And no matter what you say in your possible threat scenarios. And, Vladimir Putin might be a real bastard. I don't think he's completely crazy. And nuclear war is a pretty crazy option. Mm-hmm. So I think that the West has taken this exactly the right way, in stride. We heard the threat, we moved on, and this is where we still are.
Do you think it's possible that other countries, especially with despotic regimes, might be looking at this model of, well, if I have a nuclear bomb, then I'm going to keep countries at bay. I'm going to be able to attack so-and-so, and the West is not going to, they might put sanctions on me, but they're not going to attack me. Do you think we're providing a blueprint to these despotic leaders who may be here now or might arise in the future?
Well, I think by all means is that a calculation for sure. I mean, Ukraine had nuclear weapons stationed on Ukrainian territory. They got guarantees, Russian guarantees, that if they gave up on their nuclear weapons, nothing would ever happen to their territory. Well, where are we now? You mentioned the Iran talks. I mean, certainly it's in the back of the minds of the Iranians that they say, well, the day that we have a nuclear weapon, all calculations will change. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's why we have these discussions currently happening in Vienna with Iran, because of course we also know what happens if Iran has a nuclear weapon. Well, the day Iran has a nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia will have it the next day. And then who else in the region? That will be a very happy region filled with nuclear weapons. And not to speak of Israel. What will the reaction of Israel if Iran really gets that close to a nuclear weapon? A country that has promised 100 times over that they want to wipe you off the face of the earth. But sure, I mean, absolutely. If you look at the history of Ukraine, it tells you clearly, had you kept your nuclear weapons, none of that would have happened. And I think everybody takes note of that.
Sure. You mentioned earlier about energy and Austria in particular. Naturally, one of the primary, if not the largest source of funding to the Russian government is through energy sales. And Europe is in a pickle. And Austria in particular, with 80% of its gas coming from there, that is as I don't have to tell you, that is an amazing challenge. So I'm curious, what is Austria doing? And I don't know if you want to speak of other countries that are in a similar circumstance, but what is Austria doing to try to wean itself off, try to reduce the levels of energy that it's consuming from the Russian Federation?
Yeah, you're perfectly right. We are definitely in a pickle. Austria has no nuclear power. That was decided back in the 70s. We were very close to it. We even have a fully built nuclear power plant that never went into operation. So we have a full-size nuclear power plant museum in Austria. So no nuclear power. We have done away with coal. There's no single coal-fired plant anymore in Austria. So basically we have, thanks to our geography, we have a lot of hydropower. That's one thing. And that's of course the direction with a conservative green government, that you go into the direction of the Green Deal. That goes in the right direction. Solar, wind, all of that is something that we have anyway promised that we want to do. Well, now we can speed it up. It goes directly in the right direction, helps us in this Russian situation, and helps us anyway, because this is what we want to do. But there are no quick fixes. That is the issue, because the 80%, I'm glad you said it, because sometimes people think, well, we depend, 80% of our energy comes from Russia. No. 80% of 20% come from Russia, which is big enough a problem. But that's when I started off with this Ostpolitik, if you will. This is over. I mean, we have invested collectively $10 billion in Nord Stream 2. Well, $10 billion down the drain. For all we know, you can now fill the pipeline with salt water. Look at Germany. Germany, a country of 85 million, doesn't have a single LNG port. Croatia, a country of 6 million, has an LNG port in Krk. Germany doesn't have a single one. So now the government decided they will build 2 LNG facilities. Well, 4 years, 3 years. So that's why we, in this whole situation, we are kind of stepping on the brake when it comes to let's cut us all off from Russian gas, because that would hurt our industry a whole lot. It would actually lead really to serious unemployment in Austria. And what would that mean for the solidarity of the Austrian people with the sanctions that you're putting in place to weaken Vladimir Putin? So I think you have to play it smart, and that's the way no coal from Russia, okay, we can stomach that. No oil from Russia, more complicated, maybe doable. No gas from Russia right now, probably not doable, and not only for Austria, but for like 5, 6 other European countries where it's a huge problem. And I think what we have shown right now, under American leadership, and I really have to give that to President Biden, he has shown amazing leadership. I don't think he gets the credit, apparently, when I look at his polls, doesn't help him a lot, but he has really been a leader of the Western world in this crisis. So that helps us, but the importance is to stay together in something where there are very different interests. For Portugal, like they care about the Russian economy, maybe 1% of what they do, if that. None of Russian gas and oil imports. For the Portuguese to cut off the Russian economy, I can do it today. But the story is very different for other Europeans, and you know the European Union is a big, happy, sometimes not so happy family, but it's a family, and we want to stay together on this one. If we get divided, then things go really south. And so I think this is where we are playing, but I think we have understood that nothing will stay the same as we thought it would be. And if some people think now, give it a month, they'll find an agreement and the gas will be flowing again, think again.
I think we have time for one more question before we go to the audience. And Vice Provost Moll gave an excellent introduction to the theme of our symposium that's taking place right now, the state as experiment with a focus, again, on the experiences and thought, philosophy of Joseph Papa-Linkeus. So I'm sure you all are familiar with Joseph Papa-Linkeus, right? Raise your hand. Oh, okay. Well, so he might not be the most well-known historical figure in the United States, but clearly, as Ambassador Mull pointed out, he has a great influence that I think people at the time probably had no idea would ultimately occur. So I'm curious of your perspective on Papa-Linkeus's philosophies and their relevance to the world today.
Well, when you said that Papa-Linkeus is not that well known in the United States, I can tell you he's not that well known in Austria, you know. But some of the ideas of the thoughts where he's coming from, that still sounds very Austrian. You know, when he comes from this, the role of the state, the role of welfare, these kind of ideas, that sounds very Austrian. And, you know, in the United States, isn't the saying here, you know, what's the most threatening phrase in the English language? I'm from the government and I'm here to help. So Papa-Linkeus sounds a little different, sounds definitely European and Austrian. Also in his idea of criminal justice, you know, when he says that this is more about protection than punishment. It again sounds to me very, very Austrian. When I follow Austrian debates, and there's a lot of talk how to bring criminals back into society and so on and so forth, that's very mainstream. Death penalty is, of course, a complete no-go, and that's true for all political parties in Austria. You can't go as far to the right to find anyone who would really, as a political proposition, go there. Unless you have a particularly heinous crime, then you will have maybe a headline one day, but it's over. But politically, complete no-go. And there is very much this thought that, you know, yeah, you can lock someone up for 15 years, and what will happen after the 15 years, right? She will come back into your society, and then what will she do? What will he do? How does it help you to have this idea of throw away the key, you know? That doesn't work. And so this is very mainstream in Austria. When I listen sometimes to the debates also in the world's greatest deliberative body in the Congress, sounds to me as a European sometimes a bit archaic when you have these, okay, 3 strikes and you're out. Well, out means what? I mean, out for an 18-year-old, great. I mean, that's a real proposition for the future. Sure. So in that sense, you know, I have some warm and fuzzy feelings for Papa-Linkeus because it sounds like home. And I think in many senses quite relevant. And of course, you know, you worked in the Obama administration, Obamacare, that seems like a quite logical step for me, and I think Papa-Linkeus would have been quite d'accord with that, right?
Absolutely. So your homework tonight is to go home and Google Joseph Papa-Linkeus, and you will learn a lot, I assure you. All right, well, let's go ahead now and open up for our floor for questions. We have some folks here in the middle who have microphones, and we'd love to hear whatever questions you might have.
I understand that President Putin's popularity in Russia is going up. How long do you think that's going to continue to happen? Is it going to reverse itself, and are the people in Russia going to wake up and Putin's popularity may start declining?
Well, that's one of the terrible things in this war. I mean, first of all, I think the Russian people have a long history of suffering through difficult times. So by what we do right now with our sanctions, I think it's completely the right thing to do, but that won't lead quickly to a change of minds. It might even lead to further the narrative that, well, there the West goes again. They're always out there and trying to harm us. And you know, in the times of the Soviet Union, where things were not rosy by any means, but somehow the Russians, they found ways to kind of arrange themselves with the system. Not that they liked the system so much. You know, there was this saying when they said, you know, it all works okay because they pretend to pay us and we pretend to work. So in a way, they have a way of dealing with the system, and like I don't think that they are like the greatest fan club of Vladimir Putin, but somehow they can deal with it. And then, of course, there's the problem of a war, and it happens in every war, that there comes a moment where there's a solidarity with your leadership, because you are threatened, your boys are dying, rightly or wrongly, it's still your boy that is dying in a war. So, and there's not a lot of love for Ukraine in the Russian people. Someone told me, I didn't check on it, but that Mr. Navalny, who for us is such a great voice of opposition in Russia, is actually quite a nationalist when it comes to topics like Ukraine. So you won't find that many people in Russia who say, well, really, Ukraine, what a great country, they should be happy and whatever. So I think this is a very dangerous moment for us, and you see now on the Russian social media photos where young boys have a Z carved into their hairdo because this is solidarity with our people. So very, very dangerous moment, and I don't think that there is a public groundswell that will sweep Mr. Putin out of his office anytime quickly. I think the best thing that I think that we can hope for is that he suffers a military defeat, much like he has suffered outside Kiev. The Russian troops have not been withdrawn because of the magnanimous gesture that the Russians wanted to give peace a chance. They have withdrawn because they were beaten. And I think that's also the calculation you saw today, maybe that Slovakia gives its S-300 anti-air missiles, which are serious heavy weapons, to Ukraine. German tanks might follow in a few days. And that is the whole thinking behind this is, well, the next defeat should come in the eastern part of Ukraine. If they can pull that off, I think that's the only thing that will get Vladimir Putin to take serious talks. I think now the battlefield is talking. And if Vladimir Putin has to accept the defeat because he cannot turn it around, because there's no way for him to win this, then we might see a change over time in Russia where some people say, was that really worth it? We lost how many thousand lives to get what exactly? We already had Donbass and Lugansk before this whole thing started. So now we don't even have that. So I think that might be something. But other than that, I don't think that there are quick fixes and hopes for democracy and the democratic groundswell. Not now.
It doesn't feel like there's a monster cyber war going on from the Russians, but is that happening in Europe, right? And is it more significant than we're feeling over here?
No, that was actually one of the surprises, that we haven't seen huge Russian cyber attacks. I mean, we have constant attacks on the Austrian Foreign Ministry, and that's some, kind of daily business. And oftentimes, we don't know where they're coming from, but they're coming from Moscow. But Russia hasn't really gone down that road. It might be because they're afraid that they get hurt more than they can hurt others. But, we were all seeing all these great Russian troll fabrics with which they could do this, that, and the other. They completely lost the social media war against Ukraine. Completely lost the social media war. All those Russian trolls didn't help them on social media. They can tell their lies, but really they get very little play. So the troll factories didn't really work that well for them, and cyber attacks, they haven't really played it. We haven't seen more than you have seen in the United States. It's a battlefield that really hasn't been opened. Small things, small tries, nothing bigger until now. Might change, but hasn't.
We have some students with some questions. I'd love to hear from some of them.
Thank you so much. Ambassador, the recent Austrian finance minister just disapproved of the recent sanctions on Russia provided by the EU because of the fact that he explains that the gas and coal impacted will drastically hurt resources regarding energy. Do you think any other EU nations or nations of the European Union will agree later on this, or do you think the sanctions might still withhold long term?
the Austrian government supports the sanctions. Many people have opinions about that, and I'm sure that there are some Austrian businessmen, if you ask them, would you be happy to close your factory because you don't get any Russian gas, I can imagine what his answer would be. But the government has taken a clear line. And I think the solidarity among the West has hold for now. It's there. After Mr. Orban got re-elected in Hungary, we suddenly began to hear some funny noises from Hungary about how the Ukrainians should not insult the solidarity of the Hungarians and so on. So, you can see some little fissures. And of course, the worse this gets for our economies, and we have seen our growth rates drastically revised over the last month. We were looking at a growth rate of 4%, maybe 5%. Now we are talking about 1.5%. And there are some out there who talk about the recession. Bill Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. If our economy goes south, if we suddenly have serious unemployment, then of course you will have to ask again, how long can we hold the line? But the counter-argument is that this is extremely grave. We all saw the photos from Busha in Ukraine. How can you explain that this is something that we can accept? These are not fighters. These are people whose hands have been bound behind their back and they've been shot in the head. So I think there is still a lot of, and also what resonates with many Europeans is, I had a dinner with my Finnish friend. He was ambassador to Ukraine and then ambassador to Russia. And he said, if we can't stop this, we'll be next. And he didn't say we might be next. He literally meant we will be next. And if you listen to some Russians, the way they talk, well, Ukraine is an aberration, but actually those damn Poles, they have it coming, and they are the next in line. And those Baltic states, well, they should have. So, there's really this fear that we could literally be next. And this is not, Russia is by no means done with what they have shown now in Ukraine. And I think if you think that, and if you realize that, then your solidarity with sanctions might be a little stronger, Because when would you then start to do something? When the tanks are rolling into Vienna, is that the day when you start to do something? Or maybe you want to help Ukraine, and maybe it's be a little colder, and maybe your AC in the summer won't cool your house all that much, but that might actually be a price well paying.
I think we have a question in the back.
Yeah, so going off that last question, actually, I was wondering if you could speak to Austrian neutrality and whether you see that kind of changing in the future, or there's already kind of growing support that maybe NATO isn't the worst thing after all.
Well, like I said, neutrality was at the time a concept that was actually even foreign to Austria. But it became associated over time. If you look at where did Austria go from 1955 to 2022, it's a steady upward trajectory. Austrians became more wealthy, the country was very successful, joined the European Union, so success after success after success. And everyone in there would kind of associate this kind of success story with the model that we chose, and neutrality is part of that model. So it's not so easy for you to say, we fared really, really, really well for the last 70 years, but let's throw it out. So not so fast. But on the other hand, of course, you see now where is a line drawn in this conflict, and that's the line between NATO members and non-NATO members. And, it makes you think. And that's why Finland never wanted to join NATO. It was a bit too dangerous. If you have a border of 1,300 kilometers with the big bear, maybe you don't want to push that envelope. But I think we will see a Finnish application for NATO within a month. So things have dramatically changed. In Austria, we still are taking our merry time. And I said in one of the meetings before, there's this saying in Austria, if the world goes under, go to Austria. Everything happens 20 years later in Austria. But our defense minister has just announced that she will increase our defense budget by 10 billion euro and get our defense spending that way to 1.5% of the GDP, which is for us a huge step. So there are concrete steps are being taken, but we are not quite there that we seriously talk about NATO membership. But you know, the war is young. We are like 6 weeks into this war. A lot of things might still happen and views might still change.
We had a question right here, and the woman in red, I believe.
Hi, you just mentioned EU membership as part of Austria's success during their time of neutrality, but with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we've seen discussions of the EU's emergence as a potential military power to confront the threat of Russia. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the viability of the EU as a military power and what that might mean for Austrian neutrality going forward.
Yeah, excellent question. You know, so far, this military element is not really part of the European Union. We are very successful when it comes to our common market, when it comes to a common currency, even when it comes to open borders, although that has been questioned in the refugee crisis. But you know, there's a lot of that works really well. And you know, some people who work for Google or for Amazon, they might take the European Competition Commissioner quite serious, because that's someone who has a voice that you want to listen to, right? When it comes to the military, not so much. The military is such a national and nationalistic proposition. You know, at the end of the day, this is about defending your country with your blood if need be, and that's not something that you easily share. You know, in the European Union, when you have an open border system, that is actually a huge leap of faith. Because what you do in that system is you accept that your neighbor controls your border. By Austria being in Schengen, we don't control our border anymore. It's the most outward Schengen country, Croatia, they will control your border. It's like in the United States, if you would have that agreement, then you would say, you know what, good enough if the Mexicans control the border. We don't need a border control anymore. So there's a huge leap of faith, which we have taken in the European Union. So we are able to do these things, but in defense, still a long way to go. I remember hearing Mr. Macron talking about the brain dead of NATO and how Europe would now have to do their own thing. And I think there is this emerging understanding, yes, we have to do more, but today, if you ask a Finn, or someone from Estonia or Latvia or from Poland, and you say, you know what, you can either have the Americans on your side or Mr. Macron. Which one is it gonna be? I can tell you what his answer will be. So not so fast, not so fast. I think we go in that direction, but there will be no issues with our neutrality for a long time. And just one little example, because sometimes we talk about, okay, a common European defense, which means, for example, interoperability and things like that. When I was ambassador in Cyprus, there was a day when the French aircraft carrier, the Charles de Gaulle, came to port. And what they do, they invite you to the ship, and you see the ship, and you talk to the pilots. And we talked, and they said, you know, when we go on the open sea, on the Pacific, you know, if we meet an American aircraft carrier, what you do cross landings. Our planes land on their aircraft carrier, they land on ours, because most of us had their flight training in Arizona anyway, so this is what you do. But if the only two European aircraft carriers that we have, the Charles de Gaulle and a British aircraft carrier, if they meet in open waters, yes, the French planes could land, but they could never take off again because the runway is too short for a French plane. So this is European defense integration in practice. And if we all would decide today that we really have to change that, how long does it take to build an aircraft carrier? You know, we're talking 2035, right? So I think there are some realizations, but I think one thing that is crystal clear, we will always only do that with the United States, together in partnership, because to think that there will be this European element and now we can kind of, America will take care of China and we'll do our own thing. No, not so fast, not going to happen easily.
Thank you. And this will be our last question.
Since I'm an Austrian citizen, I allow myself to be a little bit critical. You mentioned before, you said before, when will European Union and Austrians start to act on this war on Russia when Russian tanks roll into Vienna? I want to take you one step back. You said February 24 was a Zeitenwende. The Zeitenwende started in 2014, to my thinking, and actually nobody acted on that. And the Zeitenwende didn't start in February, on February 24. Russia actually built up pressure and threats through weeks and months before, and nobody acted on that. So why did nobody see it coming? That's my first point. The second point is the refugees. There was one journalist saying, Europe welcome refugees as long as they're white and Christians. And you said, well, it's easier with the Ukrainian refugees because they are women and children. Actually, I don't see why women with small children should be easier to integrate into labor market than young men who come single without any preoccupation other than finding work. So I would say these are kind of excuses to justify something that actually has deeper ideological reasons.
Well, on 2024, I mean, you're perfectly right. There's a good argument to be made that we should have seen this coming. Because Vladimir Putin started a war in Georgia, he annexed Crimea, he started or was a part of a brutal war in Syria where hundreds of thousands of civilians have killed, and we should have seen what Russians' arms have been doing. But again, as I said before on the refugee thing, somehow this is a war far, far away, and we didn't see in Europe coming that this would be the next step. And in Crimea, you can make arguments that you say, well, Crimea, maybe you can make this argument. It's not acceptable to change borders violently, but Crimea, you can make an argument that there is a strong connection to Russia, la, 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 la. But I think you're perfectly right. We should have seen this coming. But you know, sometimes you hope for the best and you don't want to see this. And that's why I say that 2022, February 24, is a moment, a turning point. Now everybody gets it. And even when the United States were laying out their information at the end of last year, at the beginning of this year, saying, you know, we see something coming, we think this is what's going to happen, there were voices in Europe that said, well, and you saw some weapons of mass destruction back then, right? You see it coming? Well, yeah, no. So, you know, there is a question when do you really think, okay, now it's real? And I think that this is the big change. Crimea should have maybe been the change in 2014, but it wasn't. People continued to do business with Vladimir Putin. And I don't think that anyone of us can go back to normal and say, well, you know, the Ukraine war, it's like Will Smith. Vladimir had a bad day in the office, you know, it's just a little bit, but he'll get over it and then we'll do business again. No. This is, I think now everybody gets it. Everything is different now. None of us, there's no whining and dining Vladimir Putin in the next year, 5 years, 10 years, ever, I think. Which European politician wants to shake the hand of Vladimir Putin? How long do you have to wash your hand after that? With all the blood that's on it? No, really. I think there's the moment where you say, listen, that's it, over, never again. And they're not Russia and not the Russians, but for sure Vladimir Putin. Over. And so I think that's why you can say naive, stupid, hoping for different outcomes, applying an Ostpolitik with someone who is just not a partner for that. Okay, but now we know for sure. On the Syrian question, sure, I think you're perfectly right, and this is, of course, sometimes unfair. I mean, that for the Syrian refugees, they are just as much refugees and have a right to be integrated, but integration is, of course, more complicated if you have someone of a different religion. And when you talk about the Ukrainian women, what happened from Syria, you have a lot of unskilled labor, which our labor markets don't need. Austrian labor market doesn't need unskilled labor. If you are a 22-year-old with no high school education, no basic skills, no language skills, no nothing, the Austrian labor market doesn't need you. You need training to be brought up to speed that you can be really a productive part of our labor market. A Ukrainian woman who is a teacher, well, she can find a job the next day. So there's definitely a skill gap. But true, I mean, this is certainly not fair when you say, well, you know, Christians and white-skinned Christians with blue eyes are more easily integrated. Absolutely true. But as I said, you know, if it just brings a different message, drives it home differently, if a war happens 300 kilometers in front of your doorstep, or if a war happens in Syria, a country you have never traveled, you don't even find on the map, and it's just a different story. Not a fair proposition, but still a different in approach.
Mr. Ambassador, we're going to close, but when I was an exchange student, I was 16 years old, coming from Oklahoma. And I don't know if any of you are from Oklahoma or have been there. Oklahoma has shades of light green to greenish yellow and to brown colors in our nature. And we were flown to Vienna and arrived in the evening and immediately driven to Upper Austria, the province of Upper Austria. And that morning when we arrived and the sun came up and we found ourselves in the foothills of the Alps, I had never seen such green. The green of Austria is striking, and I was in awe from the moment I was hit by the sunlight that day. And I just have to share with everybody how warmly the people of Austria treated me. And I'm always grateful to the people there, my host family and friends. And I just have to encourage each one of you, if you have the opportunity to visit Austria, please do so. Take that opportunity. And I promise you will not regret it. So,
or at least watch The Sound of Music.
Well, you know, I like The Sound of Music. I know, but it's a gorgeous place, and I thank you for your time here. And we are most appreciative. Grant, thank you. Now, not everyone gets a gift as special as this, Mr. Ambassador. As a University of Virginia Law School graduate, we actually have something for you that will ring pretty close to home. And it's not for everybody, but as a Wahoo, it'll be very familiar to you, and we hope that you place it fondly and as a memento on your desk or your bookshelf. I think you all probably have an idea of what he is about to receive. Oh, wow. Oh, cool. Of course, the Jefferson Cup. Now, not everyone is so special. I would not give that to anybody. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of our partners in this event. I'm not going to read them all off. I'm just going to let you gaze at all their logos and their names. But thank you all so much. Please do not leave without lunch, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.